Well, hello. My name's Adrian Gilbert and I'd like to welcome you to the Invisible College. Now today's lecture is called The Quest for Truth, and we're going to begin our talk today by looking at something which I think we're all familiar with from childhood onwards, the ordinary pack of playing cards. You know, the kind of cards you use for playing bridge or rummy, or if you're a little bit more of a gambling disposition, maybe poker or pontoon. But there is a great mystery to these cards, and it's this that we're going to begin today's talk by examining. Now, if you look at the cards, you probably know, I'm sure, I don't need to tell you, that there are 52 in all, and we can lay these out as these four suits in the form of a square, or perhaps even a circle, just like this. Now, because there are 52 cards, it means there's basically one card for every week in the year. And you can think of the four suits as representing the four different seasons. So you've got summer represented by the suit of hearts. You've got autumn represented by the suit of spades. You've got winter symbolised by the suit of clubs, and spring by the suit of diamonds. Now the reason for that is the red ones represent the period of the year when the sun, in the northern hemisphere anyway, is in the north and the days are longer. The black cards represent the winter and autumn months when the sun is below the equator, and therefore the nights are longer and the days are shorter. All makes sense. Now the summer months are the time of joy, of happiness and so forth, time of Leo. Leo rules the heart. Therefore we can see that the suit of hearts is the appropriate one for that time. Suit of spades, autumn traditionally was the time when animals used to be put to death in preparation for the winter. They didn't have the facilities that we have today to feed their herds right through the winter. So any excess stock would be killed and would be prepared as ham or bacon or whatever, salted to preserve for the winter, to keep them going during the winter time. And then in the winter months they had the cutting of staves and building of fences and so forth, which would be tied in with clubs. And in the spring it's a time of flowers symbolised by the diamonds and the pattern of pentagrams, another symbol associated with this period of time. So many flowers have the five-pointed star shape. So we can see that there is this annual cycle, and all of us go round and round this cycle every year. We're following it, and we're born into one period or another. Everything involved. Astrology, the four suits represent these periods of the year, as I said, but they also are closely linked with certain specific signs of the Zodiac. For instance, hearts ties in with Leo. Leo rules the heart. Spades ties in with Scorpio. Scorpio is the sign mid-autumn when they used to kill the animals, and the deadly sting of the scorpion. And similarly with the other two suits tied in with winter and with spring. So we can see that there is already a deep mysticism involved in the ordinary playing cards, but these cards themselves are derived from an earlier set of cards, which you've probably come across before, known as the tarot. And if we take the tarot cards, we can put them with their appropriate suits as well. So we've got the suit of what they call deniers, money, coins, goes with the diamonds. So I'll put them out here. And we can see that we have same kind of things, 1 to 10, and then we have Jack, Queen and King of those. And we have the cups. Cups links with hearts, obviously. And we put them along here. And we can see how our cups and our hearts match. One more. And then we have our suit of swords. Swords are the same as spades. I think the word spade comes from Italian, I believe, spado, and I think that means a sword. So we'll lay them out with the spades. And then finally we've got the batons or clubs, wands. Very clear on that one there, isn't it? We'll lay them out with the clubs here. And actually you could take these, this is known as the minor arcanum of the tarot, and you could actually play the same card games with these that you play normally with an ordinary pack of playing cards. You could play poker, you could play bridge, you could play whist, whatever you wanted. You could play it with these cards. It'd be rather fun actually to have different pictures, different symbols instead of the usual ones. Make a little bit of a difference. There is one slight difference with these cards, and that is that they have actually got some extra ones. Now, first of all, there's a bunch of cards known as the Major Arcanum. These are the Minor Arcanum, and we're not going to really talk about those at this minute, and I'll be talking about them in later lectures. But there are also 4 extra Minor Arcana cards known as Knights, which we don't have in the ordinary playing cards, which brings the number up to 56 instead of 52. I think these were put in originally to disguise the connection between these cards and the 4 seasons, the 52 weeks of the year and so forth, because they didn't want to be accused of dabbling in magic or astrology or occult or whatever. You know, it's very dangerous in the Middle Ages to be associated with such things. You could be burnt at the stake. So they put these extra cards in. But we can also imagine that these cards represent the changing of the seasons. And so we'll put them in the 4 corners here, and here, and here, and here. Now, 2 of these corners represent the solstices, summer and winter solstice, and 2 represent the equinoxes. So we've got 4 major turning points of the year. You've got the equinoxes when the light and dark are balanced. They're the first day of spring and the first day of autumn. And then you've got the summer solstice when the days are at their longest, and the winter solstice when the nights are at their longest. So we've got this whole documented system here of the tarot. And you could say that our entire lives take place within this context. So our daily life, what composes our daily life? Well, I've listed a few things here. You could say going to work and the pub, courtship, sex and marriage, having a religion or no religion, interest in arts or sciences, sporting achievements, reading books. You could add lots of other things to this, playing card games. All of these things belong to the minor arcanum. And we ourselves go round and round and round each year, following the same pattern, the same cycle, until eventually we fall off the wheel and we die. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that, for most of us, what we know of life. So we can go round and round and round, but is that all there is to life? Could there be something else? Could there be something different? And that's where the concept of the way begins. And it starts with that other card that we always discard from the pack when we're playing cards, or nearly always. Our friend the Joker. As you know, the Joker's wild. The Joker can be any card that he chooses. So if you've got a Joker in your hand and you've got 3 aces, you add the Joker, you've got 4 aces. Great if you're playing poker. But the reason he can do that is that the Joker represents that part of ourselves which isn't tied down to the circle of life, to our daily grind. And he's a mimic. We're all mimics, actually, at one level. But he's a mimic. That's why he's the Joker. Jokers in the old days, they had the role of stand-up comedians as well as everything else. And one of their major things that would always get a laugh is taking people off. If he could talk like the king or talk like the queen or the bishop, that would always raise a laugh. So he's a mimic. And he's disguised most of the time. But we have to start seeing if we can find our inner Joker. And of course, he also has his own corresponding tarot card that goes with him. And that's this guy, known as the Fool. And as you know, in the old days, the Joker at the court, the jester, he was the Fool. He had to play the fool. He could say things that nobody else could say because it was a jest. I was only joking. It's nothing, you know. I'm just a fool. What do I know? So we have to, in a sense, begin our journey by finding our Joker, by finding the Fool, who can guide us away from going round and round and round to moving towards the center of the wheel. And of course, as you probably know, in Eastern philosophy particularly, the concept of the wheel of yoga, is very, very much tied in with this. The idea that you have to find your way to the center. You have to find a path, a yoga, a means of moving to the center. And there are different kinds of yoga for different kinds of people. There was hatha yoga. If we look at these 4 suits, whether we're looking at the tarot suits or we're looking at the playing card suits, you can see that they represent 4 different kinds of people. If you like, you can say the hearts represent those who are ruled by the heart. They're the lovely people, people who work through emotion, people who work through charity work, who feel for things. I feel your pain. Let me help you. Let me do this for you. Suffering, endurance, through that. All heart things. Sword people are not like that at all. Sword people are ruled by the head. Now let me analyse this. Let me see how this works in practice. Let's see, that's not scientific, the way you're approaching that. It needs to be done the right way. We need to work out the equations that will make this work. That's all head work. Or you can work through brawn, physical body. Don't hang about, dig a hole. That's the kind of approach of the clubs people. And then finally, the diamonds people are the people of cunning. That's why they're the merchants. Yeah, they're the bankers. They say, well, you know, we don't have to do this. We can fix this up this way. Yeah, let's be a little bit cunning here. And, yeah. So there are 4 different kinds of people. And they actually kind of correspond with the Wizard of Oz. Do you remember? How the lion was searching for his courage and the Tin Man hadn't got a heart. Tin Man, well, he's spades. The lion, he's hearts. And then you got the straw man, he's the clubs. And I suppose it's Dorothy herself is the diamonds. So you've got these 4 different types of people. We're all fixed into one type or another. And so first of all, the beginning of the path in a way is to begin to identify what your type is. But we're coming into that sort of thing later on as we get deeper into these lectures. I just want to talk about these ideas in a fairly general way at the moment. But we start with the way of the Fool, the way of the Joker, finding our way towards the centre. And traditionally, the Fool was very often shown in this description here. He's a bit like a Dick Whittington. There he is, he's walking along, and he's got his knapsack on his back, he's got a stick in his hand and a little dog pulling at his trousers, and he's a journeyman. In other words, he's setting out on the way. And the way is the path towards enlightenment. He might not know it at this point, that is what he's doing, but he's setting out on a journey towards enlightenment. And that's what we have to do if we're human beings. We don't want to be forever trapped going round and round the wheel until we fall off. If we want to make something of ourselves on a spiritual level, on an esoteric level, then we have to start following a way of one sort or another. And I was mentioning briefly that yoga, for instance, physical yoga, hatha yoga that we see mostly on, when you go to yoga classes, is connected with the body, and that's a clubs type yoga. There's Raj yoga, which is the yoga of cunning, which would be the diamonds yoga. There's Bhakti yoga, which would be the yoga of the heart, which would be the heart's yoga. And I think it's Jnana yoga, the yoga of the mind, and that would be the spades yoga. So there are 4 different principal forms of yoga. But that corresponds also with the Christian tradition as well, and also with the idea of the 4 orders of life. You have the aristocracy, swords. You have the clergy. This is in the medieval world. The clergy would be the hearts people. You had the merchants who were the diamonds, and then you had the labourers who were the clubs. No, that made up your entire society. But we have to break free from all of that. And so the journeyman is setting out. It doesn't matter whether he was born into the aristocracy, or if he connected with the clergy, or if he was a peasant, or if he was a merchant. The journey is going to be with the same goal. He might start from a different point, but he's going to have to follow the same goal. And it all looks very nice, doesn't it? And it's interesting to see that his wand here, which is just a walking stick, becomes on the Joker card a kind of magic wand. You'll always see that. And on this one, he looks quite happy, doesn't he? The middle-aged Joker going about his way. But that wasn't how they originally viewed these cards when they first designed them. They put him more like this, the Fool. He's got the dog is tearing the trousers off, tearing down his pants, and he's looking very distressed, you have to say, and he's got to find his way out of this awful situation. And I love this card here from the Waite Tarot, and here you see the Fool. He's actually walking on the edge of a cliff. The dog is trying to stop him falling off the edge, actually, the dog of life. But he's in a daydream. He's asleep. He's dreaming. He's walking along. He's got lovely thoughts in his mind. He's a young, handsome young man. Life is ahead of him. Poetry in his head. He's thinking about his beloved. And yet he's walking on the edge of a cliff, and he could fall off at any minute. That is us. All of us. At any moment we can fall off this wheel. At any moment we can be struck down with a heart attack. We can have a stroke. We can fall under a bus. Something awful can happen. We can be robbed of our wits. We are the fool if we don't wake up to our situation and start to do something about it. Now, there was a wonderful book that was written in the 17th century called The Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. And we see Pilgrim here at the beginning of the book. He's carrying this weighty sack of his past life on his back. He's got his staff. His guidebook is his Bible. And he sets out on a journey because he's realized that he's living in a city of destruction. and that he's got to find salvation. And nobody believes him. Nobody's listening to him. His family think he's nuts. His friends tell him, oh, don't bother with that, Stay here with us. It's all right, don't worry. He's waking up. He's starting to realize the peril of his situation. He's waking up to it. And so he's setting out on a journey. And interestingly, John Bunyan says that he's waking up because he's woken up from this dream where he's realized the peril that he's in. And in the first part of his journey, he's going to have to overcome all manner of trials and tribulations. He falls into a slough of despond. In other words, the slough of despond is when you go into a deep depression and you can't see how you're going to get out of it. You can't see your way forwards. It just seems like everything's pulling you down. We've all been there. We've all experienced this. And especially if you're trying to follow a path or way, you're going to come up against all manner of things. One of the major things you're going to come up against is yourself. You're going to discover very, very quickly that you have certain habits of thought, habits of feeling, habits of physical things. You've got habits. We're all habitual livers. And when you start changing things, you start finding those habits become an obstruction to you. And they're also your temptations. It's interesting, that we have this idea in the Christian tradition of the 7 temptations, the 7 deadly sins, things like pride and envy and avarice. And you think, well, I don't have those, or I'm not proud, I'm not avaricious, I'm an all right person, really. Well, all of us have a weakness in one area or another. And the interesting thing is that the things that tempt you now are the things that are going to tempt you throughout your life. If you're not a sort of person who is tempted by avarice, say, you won't be tempted by that. You might be tempted by drunkenness. That's another one, see, or gluttony, or sloth. But you won't be tempted particularly by avarice. Similarly, if you're a person who's very avaricious, right, you're a greedy banker. We don't like greedy bankers, do we? You can't have enough money. Yes, you've got 100 million already, but he's got 150 and I must have as much as he has. Otherwise, I don't feel I've done anything. And you get to 150. There's someone there who's got 200 million. I must have more. Yeah, I'm not up there with the superstars. Or you're proud. Yeah, I want to be famous. Yeah, I really, really want to be as famous as Beyonce or, I don't know, Brad Pitt. But I don't have to work for it, of course. I just want to be a celebrity. How am I going to be a celebrity? Pride. You're tempted by pride. Maybe it's very slothful as well. Or maybe you are hardworking. But maybe you're not. You're going to be tempted by certain things all your life. And it's always going to be the same temptations that come back to you again and again and again. And you'll never conquer them. You can hold them in check, but you'll never totally conquer them. And that's one of the things that you learn on the path, is that the battle is never finished. So he falls into the slough of despond. Can be deep depression. Some of us are more prone to depression than others. And then he gets out of that and he finds himself in a place called Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair's got all the temptations of life there. Yeah, there's wine flowing. You ought to imagine what it was like in the Middle Ages. He was writing this actually in the 17th century. They didn't have television. They didn't have radio. They didn't really have newspapers, things that we have. People didn't move around as much as we do. They didn't get to big cities. So when the fair came to your town, that was a big event. You'd go out and try things, you could buy and sell things. Yeah, there was a bit of partying going on. There'd be some loose women around, travelling around with the fairs as they went from one place to another. There'd be the chance to go out and do a bit of gambling, having fun. And these are other distractions in life that we have to be aware of. It's all right, yeah, okay, have a bit of fun, but don't let it take over your life, because otherwise you end up being trapped on the wheel and falling off, perhaps falling off even sooner than you would have done otherwise. So these are things that Pilgrim, who's trying to now find enlightenment, has to be aware of. He's got to start keeping these temptations in check. He's got to start understanding his own weaknesses, understanding who he is, and waking up to his situation. And eventually, of course, the first part of his journey ends when he finds what's called the Wickety Gate. And he finds a gateway into an enclosed space, an enclosed garden. And that, if you like, is this central the central area within inside the wheel that forms the esoteric circle. And all of this outer area we can call the exoteric circle. And the Fool, in his journeying, has brought him into the esoteric circle, where the real work, the real process of self-development can start. Finding the Wickety Gate is the start of the real journey. Everything else before that is exoteric, that is to say, belongs to ordinary life. Begin to see that there are actually levels of teaching which belong to different, entirely different, almost worlds, universes, that most of what we know, that we think of as even being exoteric isn't really. It's actually exoteric. Even if you follow a religion, the teachings that you're receiving, the general way that things are being done, is not esoteric. All major religions, including Christianity and Buddhism, Islam, whatever you like to talk of, they all have this aspect to them. There is the exoteric, which is what's given out to the masses, and the esoteric, what's kept for the very few. And it's rather like, it's not that they don't want to share it with you. It's just that there's a certain preparation is needed before you can begin to understand it. It's like if I drew a whole load of mathematical equations on the board, or physics equations, unless you've been taught what those symbols mean, it's entirely meaningless to you. It's like hieroglyphics. Unless you learn Egyptian hieroglyphics, then you look at them and they're just pretty pictures. And it's the same with esotericism. Mostly it is actually under our noses, but we don't see it or recognize it because we don't have the training, the teaching, the understanding to see what's there. So, to put it simply, there's an exoteric and an esoteric to every religion. In Buddhism, the exoteric, that's the outer aspect of the religion, includes giving food to Buddhist monks, spinning prayer wheels when you walk past them. Vegetarianism, very important if you're Buddhist to be a vegetarian. Chanting, meditation, and other rituals associated with Buddhism, right? Those big bells that they, all of that business. That's actually all exoteric. And you have to agree to certain dogmas as articles of faith. And then there's everything else that goes with it, the kind of dress the code that goes with it, everything that is taken as being typically Buddhist. And it's the same in Christianity. The exoteric side of Christianity are things like going to church or other prayer meetings. There's a hierarchy, displays of dress codes. So only bishops are allowed to wear these big hats. Only priests wear the fancy chasuble robe. Only deacons are allowed to go on to the altar wearing their robes, and so forth. nuns have a particular habit, monks have certain habits. There's a whole dress code there, like an army. Sermons from the pulpit. You go to church, you know that you're going to be given a sermon by the priest or the parson, whichever denomination you belong to, and that's part and parcel of it. He's going to lecture you about morals or something from the Gospels or what have you. Scriptures are all taken at face value. Yeah, you read the Bible and it tells you this, that, or the other, and you're supposed to take it all exactly right, exactly as said. For instance, that God created the world in 7 days, or Noah got all the animals 2 by 2 into his ark, and then there was a big flood, and Noah the only one saved. Those kind of ideas taken at face value is exoteric. Accepting all the dogmas as an article of faith. Someone hundreds of years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, decided some particular aspect of teaching was true. Maybe he was a pope. And he decided, it's not that long ago, actually, it's only the 19th century that the Pope declared that everything that he says while sitting on his seat is infallible because he's guided by the Holy Spirit. How could he make a mistake? Well, if you want to believe that, that is exoteric. Esotericism is something quite different. And there's everything else that goes with being a good Christian, like charity, faith, hope, doing good works. All of these things are part and parcel of being a Christian. If you're a Muslim, you've got to follow the codes of Islam. It means going to the mosque for communal prayers on a Friday, reading the Quran and taking the words literally, following the 5 pillars of Islam. Well, there are 5 pillars of Islam that you're supposed to follow if you are going to be a Muslim. Things like you have to make the Hajj to Mecca once in your lifetime. You have to give, I think it's 10% of your wages to the poor. You have to go and pray in the mosque. Adhering to the dietary, hygiene and dress requirements of Islam. So no bacon for you. Your meat must be halal, etc. You've got to wear certain types of dress, formal dress. Accepting dogmas that are taken as articles of faith. Well, it's the same as in Christianity. If someone said it was true, then it's come down to you. You've got to believe it. Everything else that labels you as being a good Muslim, right? You've got to have a beard if you're a man. Keep your face veiled if you're a woman. All those kind of things. Those are all exoteric. They're not what we want. They're not where we're going. So you can begin to see there are levels of awareness. There's daily life, which includes everything that we see here in the outer round of the 4 seasons, the 52 playing cards, or 52, 56 tarot cards. Everything that belongs there that we know and generally speaking take as being our lives belongs to the outer level. And it's only when we have become, first of all, the fool and found ourselves our way to the wickety gate that the path as such even begins. Hasn't even begun at this point. We're just outside the wall. So you've got to get through that first wall before the pathway actually even begins. At the wickety gate, pilgrim is met by a guide who opens the gate to him and ushers him in to the area, the enclosed area within the wall. This guide is shown also in the tarot, and he's usually presented as a figure like this. It's called the Hermit, and he's an old man, got his stick, and he's holding a lamp, and he's robed. And kind of what he means is that he's been following the path himself for a long time, and he's got certain knowledge, but he doesn't show it to everyone. The lamp he holds is partly concealed by his cloak. It's only for those who've made the effort to get thus far that he even reveals himself. And he's shown again in a different tarot pack, as this figure here, sort of like Gandalf the Grey. And here we can see more clearly the lamp being held up. And of course in the Wickety Gate story itself, the figure that greets Pilgrim is Jesus Christ, who opens the gate to him. And we have the famous picture, which you can see in St. Paul's Cathedral, of Jesus knocking on the gate and saying, he's at the door, I'm willing to lead anyone who will listen to him. So these concepts are very, very deep and very personal. But there have been certain people in the past who have followed this journey, and I want to sort of look a little bit at some of them, because in a way I see them as being our guides now. And the first of these I want to discuss is a lady called Madame Blavatsky. She was born in 1831, and she founded what's called the Theosophical Society, which is still going. She was a Russian, and her most famous books were Isis Unveiled, which she wrote in 1877, and A Secret Doctrine, which was published in 1888. And she taught something called esoteric Buddhism, which is a secret doctrine that she claimed to have been initiated in, and she had herself made long journeys going to India and into Tibet, where she met with certain masters, also she tells us, at a place called Shangri-La. So these people who have moved further forwards, in a sense, we can say, how taking on the role of the hermit. And another one that I'd like to draw attention to is Alexandra David Neal. She also was a theosophist and a Buddhist and a prolific author. And she too made journeys to Tibet, met both the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama. Now at that time, we're talking about 1916, Tibet was a closed country. This is long before the Chinese invasion, and Westerners were not allowed in there. Yet somehow she not only was able to go in, but she was brought in to meet these very, very high lamas within their monasteries themselves. And the reason she's important and Blavatsky is important is that having gone there, they then came west, came back to where they'd come from to bring the teachings that they had learned with them to help others. And that is very much the nature of the hermit, that he doesn't just stay up in the Himalayas and the mountains contemplating his navel and reaching samadhi or whatever he's doing. He comes back and he passes on the message. And both of these ladies did that in a very particular way. Interestingly, David Neal lived until 1969, so there is an overlap with many of us who were around at that time. Didn't meet her, but she was still alive when some of us were starting our own journey. Another important seeker of truth was a gentleman called G.I. Gurdjieff, generally referred to as G. And he did most of his searching in Central Asia, perhaps among the Sufis, but also he claimed that he came in contact with an esoteric Christian group. And you have to understand that Christianity, when it began, was actually much stronger in Asia than it was in Europe initially. It's only really with the coming of Islam that Christianity virtually disappeared from Asia. And there were still, in the 19th century, pockets, places where there were still schools teaching types of Christianity which are not known in the West. If they ever were known, have been forgotten. And he claimed to have come into contact with some of these groups. And then he too passed back to the West and was able to teach what he learnt in his own schools. He had one in Fontainebleau in France. He had one in Moscow initially, and then later he moved to Fontainebleau in France. So these people very much taking on this role of the guide to those of us coming later. But if we go back in time and back in history, there is a very, very notable figure who really characterizes, if you like, the whole notion of the idea of seeking for the masters of wisdom and establishing a school of philosophy, of teaching. And this is Pythagoras of Samos, who lived in the 5th century BC. Now, he's born in Greece, in Samos, but he went to Egypt to find out what knowledge the Egyptians had. And we can be sure that at least part of that knowledge was to do with geometry. We're all familiar with the famous Pythagoras theorem that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the square on the other two sides of a triangle. If you have a triangle, a 3, 4, 5 triangle, then 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 9 plus 16 is 25, 25 is the square of 5. So a 3, 4, 5 triangle is the ultimate, really, of Pythagorean triangles. So it's not really so surprising that we discover that the pyramid of Khafra, the central pyramid of the pyramids of Giza, is actually based on this triangle. The slope on it is given by this triangle. And Pythagoras must have known this. He must have been shown this by the Egyptians in his day. But he didn't stop there. He, like many other people, was taken prisoner when the Persians invaded Egypt. And he was taken back to Babylon, and it's said that he met various other wise men while he was there, including Zoroaster, the famous prophet, teacher of Zoroastrianism. But he was allowed to leave eventually, and he went from there and he founded his own school in Crotona in southern Italy. And this was based on the principles of esoteric and esoteric and mesoteric. Mesoteric being the sort of middle area, the outer court within the walls of the temple. And he called the mesoteric level, the mesoteric circle, the kousmatikoi. And the inner circle of his students were called mathematikoi. And they're the only ones who are allowed to see him. So this idea of esotericism is actually very ancient. It goes way back and is part and parcel of our European traditions. Coming back to our own time again, another notable seeker who went east was Peter Uspensky, who lived between 1878 and 1947. And he too, he went to Egypt and before that to India, searching for a secret school for masters of wisdom. And this is very much the nature of this second part of the journey. No longer just the fool is kind of drifting. He doesn't know where he's going or what he's doing. He's still in a dream. He's kind of, if he's lucky, he's sort of aware that he needs to wake up, but he doesn't know where he's going or what he's doing. The next stage, once you pass through the Wickety Gate, is to begin to focus and say, I need to find myself a teacher. I need to find a school. I need to find somewhere or someone that can bring me along to the deeper levels of understanding of esotericism. And Uspensky was in that state in 1914, at the time of the Great War. Went to India, didn't find much there. He went on to Egypt. He found a bit more there. He kind of spent time around the pyramids, and he did sort of make some kind of mental connection, if not a connection with any teacher. Then he went back to Russia, and it was when he was back home in Russia that he came across Gurdjieff, who we met earlier. And Gurdjieff had established a school in Moscow, and then Uspensky established an offshoot from that in St. Petersburg. And Gurdjieff commuted between the two and had different circles in both. But the First World War wasn't very kind to any of these people. And in 1916, they both had to flee, and they went down to the Caucasus and on into Turkey and into Constantinople. And while in Constantinople, they met up with another interesting man, a guy called J.G. Bennett, who at that time was in the British Army. He was an intelligence officer responsible for British intelligence throughout the whole of Turkey and Central Asia. And it happened by chance, but is there really chance, that Bennett rented out a room in his house to Peter Uspensky and Gurdjieff to hold meetings with Russian emigres. So he got to meet these characters and to hear a bit about what they were doing and what they were teaching. And in due course, he was able to help Uspensky come back to England and establish a school there. And I got to meet Bennett in his later years in the 70s, so I have a certain connection with these teachings. And he, again, very much in the role of the hermit, passing on the wisdom of the East, passing on what he had learnt to his students. He established his own school in Sherborne and wrote many books. So, taking all this together, we can begin to see that there is something you can call the journey towards enlightenment, which begins with, well, that's for a better way of putting it, what's called conventional religion. Just, but you have to become dissatisfied with that. And that's when the quest begins. That's when the joker, the fool in you starts questioning, what's this really all about? Do they really know? I mean, come on. Yeah, making the earth and all the universe in 7 days can't be true, can it really? Let's be honest. Getting all the animals into the ark? Oh, no. They couldn't build a boat big enough. And anyway, where would you put the kangaroos when you hadn't even been to Australia? So it's beginning to see that the conventional approach isn't enough, that you've got to go deeper. And that leads to becoming a seeker of truth. And a seeker of truth has to meet a guide. The guide is the hermit. And it might be that you meet a hermit in person. If you're very, very lucky, you'll meet someone who's been on the path before you, just as I met Bennett. And I met other people as well. But even if you don't meet them in person, you can still meet their books, read what they had to say, study their works, and make that transition secondhand, if you like, into that realm of the mesoteric. And then hopefully, if you're very lucky, you can move onwards to get to the point of what's called gnosis. Gnosis is a word, just means knowledge in Greek, but it's not just any old knowledge. It's the important knowledge. Now, before I go into that, we should look at what constitutes an esoteric school. I use this word quite a bit. An esoteric school has certain levels within it. We saw with the Pythagorean school that there are kousmatikoi and mathematikoi, different levels within it. But normally speaking, a school is divided into three, which you could call the exoteric, the mesoteric, and the esoteric. So the exoteric, moving from the exoteric to the mesoteric level, what does that require of you? Well, mostly it requires that you receive instruction. Now that, easier said than done. All of us are very unwilling to let anyone else teach us. The idea that there might be some guru out there, I suppose it appeals to some people. You see the guys all walking down Oxford Street banging their drum, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Very, very happy to have a guru. Most of us, and I include myself in this, are very, very reluctant to say, well, that man over there, he's my teacher. But even if you're not prepared to do that, there is a sense that the way doesn't really start until you're willing to listen to someone else who's been there already. I mean, after all, you wouldn't go climbing in the Himalayas, when you've just sort of gone on holiday without wanting to at least talk to someone who's been there before, who's done it before. You would understand that experience counts and your life could depend on it. So if you're going to follow the path, you're very wise if you go and look for people who've had experience of the path before you. You don't have to join their school, but you'll be very wise to at least try to find a path that's right for you and to receive instruction within that pathway. Doesn't matter if it's Christian, Buddhist, Islamic, Zoroastrian, all of the above, Gurdjieffian. You need to find a path that's right for you and find people who know a bit more than you do that can take you on through that first stage. The second stage is a bit different. To move from the mesoteric towards the esoteric actually requires that you give service. Now that service can be in many different ways. It can be service to the school that you're a member of, if you are a member of one. It can be service to other people. It can be service being like the hermit, holding up your lamp and giving some instruction to those coming behind you. Because there is actually a rule within esotericism that you cannot move on to the next level until you have put someone in the place of yourself in the previous level. And that's just like in the Grail stories. You remember the Grail stories with the Fisher King, the Grail guardian. He wanted to move on, but he couldn't until the Grail Knight came along and could take his place as guardian. Then he could move on and go on to the next level. And that's kind of how it is with esotericism, that you need to find other people to take your place so that you can move to the next level. And that applies actually all the way up the ladder. It probably applies all the way up to God, I don't know. But certainly within an esoteric school, that is a rule. And when that stops happening, when nobody is being brought along, that's when growth stops within the school as a whole. It's a bit like the housing ladder, isn't it? If you haven't got any first-time buyers, nobody can move on up to the next stage. And then to move to the esoteric level requires something else. It's not just service, it's actually individual transformation. You yourself have to undergo some kind of definite change. And this is often called initiation. It's something that if you've been through it, you know what it means. But if you haven't been through it, then it's just idle words. But there are actual things that can happen to the person. There are faculties that can be opened in us if the conditions are right, if we are right within those conditions, and if we've made the right progress previously, we can get to a point where we can be initiated. And the initiation's not done by the guru or the school or by any other person. It actually comes from something much higher than us, higher than the human race. But that again is something that is a closely guarded secret within most schools, and is something that I'm not going to talk about on this occasion, although I will mention it in later lectures. Anyway, Gnosis is what we're working towards, and Gnosis implies initiation into knowledge and techniques known to the few rather than the many. What are those? Well, Gnosis is characterized by a personal experience of the divine. And that's different from saying, I believe in God because my father taught me to believe in God, and I think that's, God's up there and he's looking after me. Yeah, you've been taught that maybe. Maybe you believe it, maybe you don't. If you have Gnosis, you have experience of what the divine means. And that is something that can be a lifetime's work, it can be several lifetimes' work. But it's something that is very real and very personal. There's a willingness to take on the burden of instructing others. Well, I said that earlier, that one of the requirements of working within a context of a school is you've got to be prepared to help others coming behind you. If you don't do that, you can't move on. It's one of the requirements of the pathway. And then there has to be an inner transformation, and that may not have gone the full journey, the full way. And we're not all going to become Jesus Christ. Would we be ready for it? I don't think I would, and I'm sure probably most people watching this wouldn't. But we can at least go some of the way and reach another level of our potential. And there are different levels within that potential. And then there has to be some degree of enlightenment. What is enlightenment? Well, it means being filled with a certain light. And there are and I'll be going into this in much more detail in later lectures, but there are actual energies which power up different parts of us. If the energies are there, then those parts of us can be activated. If the energy is not there, then they're switched off. I mean, it's just like a car. You might have an engine there, but if the key's not turned and the engine's not working, then there's no power being generated. If the battery's flat, the lights won't go on. You can't use the radio. So the whole process of the pathway of transformation is actually connected closely with making available to ourselves various types of subtle energies which can activate parts of ourselves that if we're not in that state, we don't even maybe believe that such things are possible. But if they are activated, then even miracles are possible, certainly for some people. That's not necessarily what you're aiming for, but it can be a byproduct of what we're talking about. And then there's a connection with higher worlds. And what do I mean by higher worlds? Well, we live within this cosmos, planet Earth, and as far as we can tell, the human race is the crown of creation as far as this cosmos is concerned, certainly within the animal kingdom. And the reason for that is very simple, that we have a potentiality within us that the other animals do not have. And we can throw that away. Yeah, we can just live as being intelligent animals, or we can seek to awaken the higher part of ourselves that's dormant and transform from being the human to being angelic. And there are higher levels to do with consciousness, being, existence, which we are not, generally speaking, aware of, but can be reached if we make the right efforts. Now, was any of this known before? Well, Gurdjieff certainly claimed that people in the past had left behind themselves records, what he called legomenisms. And he claimed that just as the playing cards that I showed you earlier have actually got secret teachings within them, that if you study them closely and you think about it, you can begin to unravel those secrets. So there are other things as well where certain secret teachings have been placed. Now, I know that a lot of people, myself included, have been hoping and searching for a secret chamber of records in Egypt. The belief is that somewhere buried on the Giza Plateau, maybe under the Sphinx, maybe somewhere else, there is a cavern or cave or chamber where the ancient Egyptians, the very ancient Egyptians, before the dynastic Egypt that we know, have left behind records that if we could understand them and analyze them, we would understand about Atlantis, we would know about the past, we would know a great deal more that we've forgotten. Well, we haven't found those yet, but what we have got is the pyramids themselves. And there are certain teachings, understandings, which if you really analyze and study them carefully, you can begin to get certain knowledge out. And Robert Bauval and myself wrote a book, The Orion Mystery, based on Robert Bauval's discoveries about the pyramids and how they're connected with Orion, for example. We discover that the pyramids are closely linked to the ancient belief of the Egyptians that their gods came from Orion, and that is the desirable place to go back to. But there are other things and places and writings where certain teachings have been preserved. One is the Bible. If you study the Bible the right way, you begin to see certain teachings within it that are not obvious, that you're not normally taught in church, that people, they probably don't even read the Old Testament most of the time. Certainly didn't when I was a boy. But if you do read it, you discover that there's all manner of ancient teachings within there. And one of these is the concept of the covenant of Jacob. Jacob, who was renamed Israel, had a vision of a ladder going up to heaven with angels coming up and down it. And he made a pact with God. And then he initiated his 12 sons. Actually, 2 of them were his grandsons, but 12 in all. And created this school, family school, as it were, with himself in the center and his 12 sons, who represent the 12 signs of the Zodiac. And those 12 signs of the Zodiac actually represent 12 gateways through which you can progress. Because we're all born under one or another sign, you see. And the idea is that, just as I was saying about there are mental types and heart types and physical types and cunning types, 4, there are subdivisions within those 4 which link up with the concept of signs of the Zodiac, and those being your gateways. And if you know your gate, which he emblemizes also with the 12 tribes of Israel, then you know what your purpose or your attitude should be and how you can fit into the whole and how you can make progress towards the center. Well, that was all lost by the time the Romans were invading Israel, which by then the northern Israel had been taken away and disappeared. Southern Israel, Judah, had been taken to Babylon. Some of them had come back. They'd had a brief flowering. The Romans had come in. So at the time of Jesus, all this had been lost. But Jesus came along and he did something very similar. He established his church. And his church was, the word church actually comes from the Greek word kirkos, which means a circle. It doesn't mean a building with a steeple and a bell in it. It means a circle. And there was an outer circle, which you can call the general audience. We read about it in the New Testament. He wandered around and all these people would be out there. He'd have to feed the 5,000, etc. The loads of people gathered around him listening to what he had to say. And then within that exoteric general audience, there was a group of 12 apostles, which we can call the mesoteric level. He sometimes would take them aside and he would explain his parables to them. He didn't explain them to the general audience. He just told them about sowers and seed being thrown and not growing, or he spoke to them in parables, but then he would explain these parables to his apostles when they're in private. And then there's the esoteric level, which is Jesus himself. So he's the great initiate, the great teacher, the messenger of God, coming down and dispensing not just knowledge but energy as well. That again is another story. So we can see that he was establishing his church, his circle, as being something new, but is also very much a recreation of the old covenant of Jacob Israel, that he was like the new Israel, and he's establishing a new covenant. And instead of the 12 sons of Israel, 12 tribes, he's got 12 apostles. And they're the ones that are being initiated, brought forwards, ready for when he departs. And then they can go off and start their own circles, their own churches, which they did. There was church here, a church there, a church elsewhere. And each church had its own bishop. The word bishop comes from episkopos, which means out of the fish foot. Out of piscus, fish, pus, foot. So they're the feet out of the fish. Jesus is the fish. They're his footprints on earth, as it were. And that's why they wear a fish hat. And each one would establish his circle, and he would have 12 disciples of his own. And then through them, reach a larger audience. And this system actually continued in Wales particularly right up until the Middle Ages, when it was kind of stamped out. And a new hierarchy was created through a centralized church system. But the idea originally was that the bishop himself was an initiate, that he himself had reached a higher level of development. He himself was in possession of certain energies, and therefore he was in a position to found a church and to run it and to bring people onwards to take his place so that they in turn would become bishops. Well, you may ask, is there any evidence that there have been other esoteric schools further back in the past? Well, I would say that there is. And very interestingly, one of those schools active in what we would call the Stone Age, but I prefer to refer to as the Golden Age, is Stonehenge itself. And if you look at the plan of Stonehenge, you can see very clearly that the intention of the builders was to express on the ground the concept of an esoteric school, the exoteric, the mesoteric, and the esoteric. And here you can see these outer ring of stones laid out there. You have an outer ring which has the same perimeter as the square that contains the middle ring. Now, when you have a square with the same perimeter as a circle, that is actually the same geometry that's used in the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and implies knowledge of pi, knowledge of the relationship between the circle and the square. How do you square a circle? And a square and a circle. Square symbolizes matter, circle symbolizes spirit. So the reconciling of the square and the circle is reconciling spirit and matter. So clearly, when you look at the plan of Stonehenge, what they're saying here is this is a place where spirit and matter are reconciled. In other words, where we have the teachings with the understandings of how to bring about the union between spirit and matter. But there's also other things there as well. You see the six-pointed star. Well, a six-pointed star is also the generator of a 12-pointed star, or a shorthand version of a 12-pointed star. That implies the mesoteric level, equivalent of the apostles. And you can see that there's an inner ring of stones around that. I think those are the Aubrey holes around the six-pointed star. And then contained within that, you've got the great trilithons, and then you've got this inner circle within the middle, where there's only the one stone, the altar stone. So the symbol of Stonehenge is actually that of a church, a kirkus, circle. I think the Scots have got it right. They call it a kirk, a kirk, a circle, kirkus. And Stonehenge is clearly a church, for want of a better term. And here's another church that actually is round, the Temple Church. You've probably come across this if you've read Dan Brown, but you may have come across it earlier as well. It was built by the Knights Templars. And if you look at the plan on the floor, there's the round bit here, which is divided up into 12, just as 12 apostles, 12 sons of Israel, 12 signs of the Zodiac. And then that is kind of like the mesoteric level. And then within that, you've got the 6 pillars, and that's where you've got the burials of the Earls of Pembroke and several other knights there. That would be the inner sanctum, as it were, the inner teachings of this place, of the Templar order. They clearly were an esoteric school. That's why they had the attraction that they did for people. People want to be initiated. They want to be part of an esoteric school. The Templars in their own day was an esoteric school. How pure it was, how effective it was, that I don't know. But it clearly was based on esoteric principles. And then you've got the square church, which is the exoteric bit. That's the bit where the other people can go and sit, those who are not initiated into the mesoteric level yet, let alone the esoteric. So the temple church itself is a symbol of an esoteric school. It is a kirkus. And then we've got the Winchester Round Table. Again, we've got the same kind of patterning there, repainted at the time of Henry VIII with the Tudor rose in the middle, and around it the alternating stripes for the positions of the knights. The Knights of the Round Table would be the equivalent of the apostles. Again, the Round Table is an esoteric school, and the knights receive certain teachings and then they go off in quest of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail represents a much higher energy. What they're in quest of is initiation, their own initiation through the Grail, and nobody can give that to them. King Arthur can't give it to them. Merlin can't give it to them. Sir Gawain can't give it to them. Nobody can give it to them. They can only receive that directly from God. And that's why they go off, and very few of them actually are successful, because that is also the nature of esotericism, that not everyone makes it. Not everyone's going to get the initiation. But that doesn't matter, because we're not expected to. There will be other opportunities later. The important thing is to make the start, to make the beginning within this life, and then things can go on from there. So it's an esoteric school symbolized by the Round Table. And here you can see the table of the Grail in the middle. The Grail appears to them on one occasion, on Whitsun. Whitsun is the feast of the Holy Ghost, when the Spirit, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit is supposed to have descended on the apostles, and tongues of fire appearing above them, and then they had powers. They could speak in tongues, they could do miracles, because they were imbued with this energy. So something similar seems to have happened here with King Arthur's Round Table, which is an esoteric school. And then they want to find out how they can get more of this. And finally, there is the pattern or the picture that's given at the end of the book of Revelation for the New Jerusalem itself. Again, the New Jerusalem is an esoteric school. It's going to be a place, if it manifests the way it's described, where mankind as a whole are going to be initiated. First of all, the first 144,000, and then many of the rest of us, if we're fortunate enough to be alive at that time. So the whole idea of esotericism and the esoteric journey is characterized right through the Bible. We see elements of it going way back to places like Stonehenge. We can see the symbols of it there. We see it within King Arthur's Round Table, what was really going on at an esoteric level there. We see it with the Knights Templars. We get elements of it with Madame Blavatsky going to the east, bringing knowledge back to the west and starting the Theosophical movement. We get more of the same with Gurdjieff going out to his part of the east and bringing back other teachings and initiating the idea of schools and school teaching, which is brought forward by people like Uspensky and Bennett. And now we're in our own time. We know that we're living in a time of change. I've written a lot about this in various of my books, but with the times when the stargates are open, but that's a whole other subject. So we should expect certain things to be manifesting at this time, and things which have been talked about in private before within closed circles, closed groups, now being broadcast to the world through the internet, through opportunities like this, through DVDs and lectures. we are at a time of a wider, much wider initiation of mankind. And this is a very, very exciting time to be around. So thank you very much for your time and your patience. And I hope you enjoyed this. And we'll meet again. Thank you.